Since the race around Suzuka has moved to the front end of the calendar for this season, there's plenty to discuss about what we might see this weekend after an unexpected winner last time out in Australia and some technical updates coming from many teams. Let's preview the 2024 Japanese Grand Prix. F1's last visit to Japan was just 7 months ago in September 2023. Its place at the end of the calendar that year meant we saw Red Bull Racing crowned Constructors' Champions after a return to the top step for Max Verstappen following a tougher time in Singapore the previous weekend. It was also McLaren's Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri's first double podium and their first as a team since 2021, with Lando taking P2 and Oscar taking P3. Some controversy further down the grid and multiple DNFs made it a very interesting race. Let's review the action. Max Verstappen secured victory after starting on pole and fending off challenges from McLaren's Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri at the start, and then pulling a lead of over 20 seconds over the race distance. On the other side of the Red Bull garages, Sergio Perez faced multiple penalties for contact with Kevin Magnussen and a safety car infringement, and damage that meant he retired early. But in a strange twist, faced with the choice of serving his time penalties at this race or carrying them as grid penalties into the next, Red Bull sent Sergio Perez back out on track post-retirement to serve them here. Other retirements included Valtteri Bottas after contact with Logan Sargent, Logan himself, who had started from the pit lane with a 10-second penalty after Williams effectively built him a new car following a crash on Saturday, Lance Stroll, who had a rear wing issue, and Alex Albon, who suffered a collision at the race start. Some inter-team battles for position between McLaren teammates and Mercedes teammates made for some interesting radio messages, but ultimately it was Lando Norris who finished in P2 with Oscar Piastri in P3, bringing home McLaren's first double podium at the time since 2021. The Mercedes drivers were beaten by Ferrari, with Leclerc in P4, Hamilton in P5, Sainz in P6 and Russell in P7, with Alonso and the two Alpines rounding out the top 10. The Japanese Grand Prix takes place at the Suzuka International Racing Course, or Suzuka Circuit as it's better known, which was built in 1962 as a test track for Honda. But it took until 1987 for it to be featured on the Formula 1 calendar, and from here it built its reputation as one of the drivers' and fans' favourite tracks. The circuit is 5.807 kilometres long, with 18 turns, meaning we'll have 53 laps of racing come Sunday. Suzuka is a high-speed circuit, with some of the most iconic corners on the calendar posing a unique challenge for the drivers. The track is the only figure-of-8 shaped circuit on the F1 calendar, and as such is the only track to go both clockwise and anti-clockwise within a single lap. Due to this, most of the circuit's high G corners are left-handers, which puts increased strain on the drivers' necks. The highest lateral G-force a driver experiences around the lap is 3.9 G through the famous 130R turn. The track is also quite narrow for a purpose-built racetrack in terms of the width of the asphalt itself and the runoffs, both of which mean there's high risk of contact between drivers and between drivers and barriers as they find the limits of performance through the incredible ebbs and flows of this circuit. Moving on to tyres, and despite the race being moved to the opposite end of the calendar, Pirelli have kept their selection consistent with the range the teams were offered at last year's Grand Prix. The C1 compound will be the hard, with the C2 as the medium and the C3 as the soft. Last year's strategies were dominated by a two-stop race, with the front runners choosing to start on the medium and then either move to the medium then hard or double hard stints. Pirelli had found the track surface to be much smoother than they'd expected, and coupled with the high temperatures, the tyres were at risk of high thermal degradation. Conditions for this weekend's running are looking mixed, with a threat of rain at 24% for Saturday and 32% for Sunday, so we could see the intermediates being called upon for the first time this season. This of course would throw any planned slick tyre strategies away, but given the lower temperatures due to the spring timing for this race, Pirelli feel that a one-stop may be possible. Any team that chooses a one-stop will need to be aware of the risk of decreasing the effectiveness of the undercut, which is typically very useful around Suzuka, but also the risk of the tyres dropping outside of the optimal operating window, so we could see some interesting strategies this year versus last. There are plenty of talking points heading into this weekend's running, but here are a few that you should keep your eyes on. Max Verstappen has taken pole at Suzuka for the second year in a row, but by much less of a margin this time around. There's just 0.066 seconds separating Max from his teammate Sergio Perez in P2, who's taken his first front row start since the 2023 Miami Grand Prix. The RB20 is very well suited to Suzuka's high to medium speed characteristics, but Max felt that his pole lap wasn't ideal despite this, saying after qualifying that the aggressive tarmac and sensitivity of the tyres hadn't helped. Sergio Perez also said he found it more difficult given the cool, overcast conditions we saw in Suzuka for qualifying, and with just over half a tenth to pole, he felt a better Sector 1 could have made the difference. Though it's highly likely Max will stretch his legs out front over the Grand Prix, we could see an interesting challenge on the Red Bulls from Lando Norris in P3 at the start, with Lando and Checo perhaps battling over the race distance. After an amazing weekend in Melbourne, Ferrari had a trickier day in Suzuka, which could make for an interesting recovery drive from Leclerc particularly, who qualified in P8. It was better for Carlos Sainz, who finished in P4 and was happy with his performance for the day. So why was Leclerc so far behind his teammate? Despite feeling like the laps were good, Charles had less grip and struggled with the tyres more compared to Carlos. Issues with tyres were quite common for Ferrari last season, and it seems they'd resolved their long-run degradation issues heading into this year. But perhaps there's more work to do when it comes to tyre preparation in cooler conditions as we had in qualifying. The race is looking to also be cooler, so look out for whether the Ferrari can manage its tyres in these conditions. Yuki Tsunoda said he was feeling the pressure before qualifying for his home race, but once again he made it into Q3 and finished the day in P10, a result he can be happy with and used to claim some points in front of his home fans in the race. While Yuki was ahead of his teammate Daniel Ricciardo, the gap was much smaller than we've seen so far this year, with just 0.055 seconds separating the pair. Daniel's lining up in P11 on the grid after just missing out on his first Q3 appearance of the year, which of course frustrated him. But given his limited practice time with Ayumu Iwasa taking over his car for FP1 and Rain stopping play for FP2, he can also be happy with his best results so far this year. RB have some solid strategic options heading into the race, given they're occupying successive spots on the grid. So could a double points finish be on the cards? Only time will tell. Heading into the Japanese Grand Prix, there's one key limitation for all the teams, a lack of long-run data. FP2 is typically the most representative session for the race, and is where teams would like to gather their data for longer runs, but it was dampened by rain, and so very few drivers took to the track. Because of this, we saw some teams do long runs in FP3, but these are limited in how they'll relate to racing conditions, so many will be going into the Grand Prix fairly blind as to their long run pace. This could make for some interesting tyre choices, strategies and setups affecting the race, so look for whether this will shake up the order. Before we wrap up the video, it's time to make a quick prediction for the top 3 on Sunday. I think we'll see McLaren's Lando Norris finish in P3, Ferrari's Carlos Sainz in P2, and Max Verstappen once again return to the top step of the podium in P1. Who do you think will be on the podium? Let us know in the comments. The Japanese Grand Prix is set to be an amazing race and weekend as usual, with the added twist of a different time this year and some technical updates given its early position in the calendar. Though it's highly likely that Red Bull will be back on top around Suzuka, could Ferrari's accelerated updates allow them to challenge them? Only time will tell. Don't forget to drop your podium predictions in the comments, like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to Apex for more deep dives into the F1 world.